This week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, is a very interesting Parsha. There's a lot going on in the story of the life of Avraham Avinu. I want to focus on specifically the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the punishment meted out to them, the message of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, and how we use it, meaning we as the Jewish people use it as a reminder of the value of doing kindness to others. So let's talk a little bit about the story to kind of help frame it a little bit. So we know from last week's Parsha that Sodom and Gomorrah are Chataim LaHashem Ma'od. They are big sinners to Hashem. We don't know what the extent of that is until this week's Parsha. And we get an introduction to that when Avraham and HaKadosh Baruch Hu have a conversation. How can I hide from Avraham what I'm about to do? Avraham is going to be the one who's going to intercede on behalf of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah who are quite wicked. So Avraham looks at it like this. It's impossible, in his estimation, that there cannot be somebody worthy of saving. In every generation, there must be people worthy of saving. And the Midrashim actually go back and forth about having 30 people in every generation to save, which is interesting because our Masoras usually talks about 36. I talked about that in some of my discussions from last week and last week's video. But the idea is that there must be something redeemable. There's Lot, but not enough to save the cities. Just enough to get Lot out of there. And even Lot, it wasn't really for him, as for Kadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, the Al-Sheikh points out, says, the Psukim don't let you think that this was about Lot being such a good guy. Lot was led astray by what he saw. It's a beautiful land. A beautiful land, as beautiful as Egypt, as beautiful as the Garden of Hashem. He leads himself there. We get a taste of how bad it is when the angels themselves leave Avraham's presence and go to Sodom. What happens when they get there? Sodom wishes to do nothing but wicked things to them. They do not wish to entreat them into their homes. They don't wish to take care of them. They're not interested in taking care of the travelers. And with this, we see the final nail in the coffin for people of Sodom. In fact, there's nothing redeemable about them at all, because after the discussion with Abraham, and Hashem does his last little review over the whole place, the only person worth saving is Lot. He takes Lot out, and he takes his wife out, and takes his daughters out, and the other ones who are there, they don't even want to listen. That's how ingrained into society they had become. And they wish to do no kindness to others. What's fascinating about the structure of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is that it finds a parallel also in the 19th chapter, based on the way that the chapters are laid out. So the old edition is not necessarily the new Koran edition lays out chapters. If you look at chapter 19 in the book of Shoftim, Sefer Shoftim, known as the book of Judges, a similar story happens with a young man, a Levite, and a Pilegesh. A Pilegesh is translated as a concubine, like his girlfriend, basically, that she just stuck with him for the journey. And the young men of Yavish Gilad, of Giva, do terrible things to them, and don't want them in their city, don't want them in their place, and instead they seize onto the Pilegesh and they do terrible things to her the whole evening, and through that they receive a punishment. There's some very interesting dynamics that are shared between the stories and that are different between the stories, but I want to use to highlight how that impacts our understanding of this week's Parsha. In the story of the Pilegesh B'Giva, they don't want to do any kindness to the travelers. In fact, they want to do ill unto them. That is a very similar parallel to the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. However, there's one significant difference. Hashem does not come to the Jewish people and ask them what to think about how to punish Gomorrah. That conversation doesn't happen. The conversation that happened between Avraham and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was absent. What do the Jewish people do instead? Because they've already received the Torah and they already have established their covenant with God, they do what's called inquiring of the Urim V'Tumim. And in fact, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen is alive at that time. They ask him, and he's wearing the Urim V'Tumim, and they say that they should go against Binyamin. However, they make a terrible error in assuming that they themselves were worthy of exacting this punishment, that they themselves were doing the right thing, and they didn't acknowledge about themselves how they had been already, even immediately after the conquest of the Yoshua, bound up in their own issues and their own problems. They wanted to simply take up a moral crusade and rouse the cavalry against Binyamin, but they weren't necessarily worthy of that. And in a sense, that's something that's strikingly different between the case of our Parsha. Our Parsha delineates for us how terrible it was that people should be so unkind to others that they're not worthy of remaining on this planet. Their cruelty is so pervasive and is so attractive that it needs to be stopped. Is there anybody worthy here of being saved? That's the question you have to ask about a successful society. They clearly were a prosperous society. Clearly were an attractive place for farmers and for people to go ahead and have their sheep browse and go across the open plains. People weren't fighting about their property rights. But even in the Gemaras, they talk about how terrible their system of justice was. It was a perverse system. They had no compassion for others. The Gemara talks about some silly cases where someone strikes another person and he says, "Oh, you're the victim who got struck. You need to pay him because he did you a favor. He let some blood out that actually improves your circulation," based on their way they look at things at the time. He says, "Oh, you struck that woman and she lost her pregnancy. You now have to go and impregnate her." These are the cases that the Gemara brings down in the Gemara in Sanhedrin in Kuftes Amaves 109b. Number of cases. The Gemara discusses what perversions go on in Sodom. But they're not mentioned explicitly in the text, but they're inferred from the fact that people who conduct themselves this way are unable to continue as a society. So in that light, when we understand just how bad that society is, we can understand even furthermore why they're constantly used on a regular basis in the imagery, in the Torah, in the Nevi'im, in the Ksuvim, even in Eicha, that even says that we've become like them. What is the level of depravity that they've reached? It's a level where they don't even empathize with others. And that's really the most important message that we get of Vayera. Why is Abraham loved so much? Because not only does he think about himself and about what's good for the spiritual aspect of the world, but he also takes into account the value of the physical aspect of the world. That there needs to be more empathy. We need to care about others. There needs to be an olam shel chesed. And I used to take many classes many years ago with Shlomo Volbel Alav Shalom, and he wrote a beautiful work called Olam Hayedidos. And it's not as well known as some of the other works of his, like the Mussar Sfarim, like the Alei Shor and the Tia V'Zriya V'Chinuch. But Olam Hayedidos focused on one very important topic, different than a work like Avos Chesed V'Chafetz Chaim. The idea was to show just how much the world relied on loving kindness. And Yedidos is different than Chesed. Chesed is that my act onto you of bestowing some type of kindness, whatever that kindness is. I give you some charity, I invite you for a meal, I show you some time, I give you some of my care. But the Yedidos is the actual act of interconnecting and believing things are part of a greater picture. And that was the world view being painted in his Sefer. And specifically, when we look at it in terms of what Sodom was doing, Sodom was trying to say, we don't even take care of our own. We are certainly not taking care of others. You have to build up and be right and just. And there's a commentary, it was a random commentary, I don't remember the name of the commentary that I saw, on the Gemara that asks a very important question. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Chelek. And it asks a very interesting question. Why doesn't Hashem just destroy them for perverting justice? Like, why do Chazal have to point out that they had this perverted justice system? If anything, there are Rishonim who say, like by Shechem and other places, that they were deserving of destruction and worthy of destruction because they didn't implement the laws properly. When there's Sodom, but Sodom is not punished for that. Their problem is their inability to be kind to others. They lack the ability to do simple things. They won't even give someone else salt. You can't even give them salt. Give them nothing. Wouldn't even give them nothing. And as Rashi points out, that's the big hate of Lot's wife, and what causes this whole downfall is the asking for the salt from her neighbor. Gave away the whole thing. Even Lot was just like a little bit kind, a little bit. So this one commentary asks in Chelek, shouldn't they have been deserving of destruction because they're not following the Noachide laws? That's what keeps them around. Their kiyum, their mitzias of them sticking around is through fulfilling these laws of Noach. But that's why the Gemara points out they had justice systems that were perverse and were liars and manipulators. The point is that they established a system of law that benefited their selfish way of life. And in a sense, it's the type of loophole that one would call a novella b'reshus hatayah. The Ramban comes up with that in Parshas Kedoshim, but in a way, it's a novella b'reshus nayach over here, b'reshus hilchas nayach, and the shiv mitzvah v'nei that they were perverting the laws to suit their own ways of acting, and because they were incapable of doing any form of charitableness or taking care of others, there's nothing redeemable about them. So you have to weiter have the frage, what about the fact that there is no mitzvah in the mitzvahs b'nei Noach about doing charity or any type of thing? These are not expected of them. The reason why they had to be destroyed is because when righteousness finally leaves the earth, there is nothing redeemable about people who are following the laws. Meaning that not only do they seek, as we see in the story, to go out of the way to not be charitable, they go out of the way to actually do wrong to others. And they use a system of justice to pervert that, do these type of things. Just like with Shechem taking Dinah, oppressing her, and same thing over here with them trying to oppress the angels who come in. They were following the laws on the outside, but on the inside, the rot had already set in. And this is the most terrible thing that can occur, that can happen to a person, is that on the outside they feel like they are a righteous person, but deep down that's what Akash Baruch Hu sees, is that deep down they simply look to do ill to others, they look to do unkind things to others. And there's a great word for it that I've seen around for many, many years called nihilism. I don't think anything has any value, and that nihilist approach is contrary to the world of yedidos, of interconnectedness that Akash Baruch Hu sees, of us caring for each other and loving each other. Have a good Shabbos.